Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
She Could Fly has already earned some wonderful praise. G. Willow Wilson called it full of unexpected pleasures, masterful, joyful, poignant, a must-read. And Aaron Paul wrote, She Could Fly is a modern-day masterpiece. It's heartbreakingly beautiful and honest to its core. Christopher Cantwell is an executive producer, co-creator, and showrunner of the highly acclaimed AMC series Halt and Catch Fire, which is set within the early days of the computing revolution. He holds a BFA in writing for the screen and television from the USC School of Cinematic Arts, and most recently directed his first feature, The Parts You Lose. He currently lives in Claremont, California with his wife Elizabeth, sons Cooper and Leo, and dog Albie. Nick Dazé is an author, technologist, and entrepreneur. He is the founder and CEO of Block HQ Inc., a software company developing AI for the apartment rental industry. He co-hosts the podcast Robot F. Kennedy, and is the author of the children's book Roger Nix, President at 6. He holds a BA in creative writing from USC, as well as a BA in theater from the School of Dramatic Arts, also at USC. He currently lives in Manhattan Beach, California, with his wife Kendra, son Henry, and daughter Nell. We are so fortunate to have them with us this evening. Please give them a warm welcome.
Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. I just want to start off with a little bit of fandom. I've known Chris for a long, long time and have respected and admired his television writing, his improvisation, his short film work, and this is She Could Fly is very different and very lovely and very intimate, and very scary. And I mean all of that in a really good way. So I just wanted to say thank you for putting it into the world.
Thank you.
Before we start.
Thanks for being here.
So I wanted to start not talking about the plot or the characters right away. The framework I used for thinking about this was my journey as a kid with comic books, and I want to ask you about your journey as a kid and as an adult with comic books. Like, what do they mean to you? What were some early comic books that you were into as a kid? Who bought them for you? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I don't know why I have this memory, but the first comic book that I remember getting was I went on a camping trip with my dad, who's right there. And we went to Tyler, Texas. I grew up in Texas. And we stopped at a, convenience store or something like that. And I ended up buying a comic book, or my dad bought me a comic book. I was very young. And it was Marvel Tales featuring Spider-Man. And Spider-Man fought two Latin American brothers who turned into werewolves. And I remember reading that on the camping trip, and I guess that was it, man. I was off. That's all I needed. And then from there, I think I started wanting to read more. And so there were comic book shops where I grew up, and my mom, who's also right there, would take me to the comic book store, and I'd pick up my comics in their box every week.
Were they? I growing up knew some kids that were encouraged in their comic book habit, and some kids, usually with like very severe Catholic parents, that comic books were very, very not okay in their households. Where did you guys fall in the camp?
Well, I had very severe Catholic parents.
Okay.
But they were very supportive of my comic book habit. We would go to Big Bob's Cards and Comics or Lone Star Comics, and I had a pull list, which is, you sign up at the front and say, these are the issues I want, and they'll file those into your boxes before they put them on the rack so that you make sure you have the issues you want. And so I was able to do that when I was pretty young, and I did that pretty much all through middle school. And I, to the point where I had a giant Foot Locker of comic books in my room.
Was there a specific kind of set of characters or story arcs that are very close to your heart? Were you more particular to science fiction-y or horror comic strips, humoristic or ultra-violent ones? Like, what was your jam?
I think, it's funny. I will say that my parents were very supportive of my comic book habit, but maybe too supportive, where they would not open them in terms of what the content was inside. It'd be like, oh yeah, sure, go ahead and get that. And then, I would go home and read them and be pretty blown away by some of the things I was seeing inside. So at first it was superhero stuff. I think that's like a really easy entryway into comic books. And then from there, it was more adventure stories. There were things like Bone was a comic book that came out in the 90s that I really loved. And then if you went darker, things like The Mask, which preceded the crazy movie with Jim Carrey, that was something that I picked up and was probably too young for, but was pretty blown away by. And yeah, I think I started to find more of the indie stuff on the outside. I didn't go too deep into that, not until I was maybe older, when I came out here. That was probably the second comic book phase I had, was when I came to college. Yeah.
Do you still have like a collection?
Yes, I do.
Is it with you or is it your parents' house?
It's actually at my house. Yeah. It was one of the few things that my parents kept from my childhood room. Most of that stuff was gone. But I got a Foot Locker sent out to LA with a really good friend of mine when he moved out here. This was years ago. And it had all of my comic books in them. And so I've just kind of moved them back and forth between houses, and now we have 2 kids and I'm married. And only recently, with all of this stuff, did I decide to finally go through and actually organize it. So I organized it with my son, Cooper, who was not allowed to open most of the issues.
I was going to ask, is Cooper into, have you shared any with him yet?
He's excited to go to comic book stores, but then when he looks at the racks, he gets pretty quiet and freaked out, just because, even though it's not terrifying stuff on the covers, I think he's just really overwhelmed. So he'll go to there's like a kid section of the comic book store in Claremont, and so he goes over there, and it's like Ninja Turtles and Hilda and like all of these other things that are great for kids.
That's fantastic. I also want to ask you a little bit about how writing for the format of a comic book or graphic novel, which I think is a newer experience for you, compares and contrasts with the other mediums or media that you've written for. In what ways is it liberating and freeing? In what ways is it constricting? Like, what are your high-level takes?
I really like it because it's fast. At least to me, it feels faster just because you can get it down and tell the story very quickly. I like how simple it is, where it's a single image. And I try not to do a lot of dialogue, just period in stuff. In TV or film, you have the liberty, theoretically, to write a lot. I'm fortunate to have a partner who will pull me back from that. And so I imagine him sitting with me when I'm writing comic books, where it's like, consider cutting. And so I will go through a lot of the comic book dialogue and really try to reduce it to very few sentences, the least amount of words per sentence. And the rule of thumb that I've learned is that most of the time you can fit 3 bubbles in a panel. And so if you can get it back and forth, just a little quick volley, then if you can get that going, then you're set. But more than that, it gets wordy.
I'm gonna catch myself getting a little philosophical here.
Please don't.
Well, okay. No, something that something that was accidental for me as a kid was that I often received comic strips from adults that didn't know any better, and it would be like issue number 4 in an arc that I had no context for. But in a way, the format lends itself well to just diving into the middle of these characters' actions and kind of running with it. And that's what the characters feel like in She Could Fly. I mean, one really notable example is Keto, the grandmother, or Gamma, very early on in the first issue, comes back after 7 years away. Can you talk about what the inspiration for that was, and if there's anything more to that back? I want to ask you so many stories about Keto's backstory.
No, I think
her backstory.
That this comic, even though it has flying technology and a lot of weird stuff in it, I think that my grandmother came to live with us when I was about Luna's age. And she lived in Chicago for her whole life almost. She grew up in Germany and came to America in the 50s. And my experience of my grandmother was living alone because my grandfather passed away when I was about 2. And so I just have no memories of him. And so she lived alone for a long time, and then she became ill in her health, not like super late in life, but like, around the time that you might get ill, like on the early side. And so she had to have open heart surgery, these things, when I was in 7th grade, and then she ended up coming to live with us. So her whole life, it feels like I had 2 different grandmothers, you know what I mean? Where I had one who was that woman who was living alone in Chicago and couldn't drive but would walk to the grocery store, do all these things. And then I had a different grandmother who lived with us for 4 years or so before she passed away. So it was very sudden, I think, for our family. It felt that way, at least. Where it felt like a very big interruption. Even though she was sick for a while and we had to go up there for the surgeries, when it was, the selling of the house and her moving in with us, it seemed to happen pretty quick. So that felt like where I drew a lot of keto from.
Yeah.
Was that.
So there are a lot of great, very rich, very complex characters in these issues, but I really want to talk a lot about the interplay between Luna and Keto. They seem like mirror images of one another. I'm going to veer away from any spoilers for those of you that haven't read it yet, but to give a little bit of context in case you haven't, Luna is a young teenage girl that is dealing with some mental health issues, and her grandmother comes back after a long stay in Japan, and so much of this is about Luna's mental state and what she's going through, what she's going through in her inner life and her outer life. Mm-hmm. And yet, for all the frenetic mental energy that Luna has, Keto is an empty vessel almost, or is pursuing a spiritual or mental state of being an empty vessel. That was more of a comment than a question, really. Talk to me about the kind of interplay of those characters, and about what in your life kind of spills into them as they relate to one another and as they are as
Sure.
individuals.
I went through a lot of the exact similar things that Luna went through when I was actually a little bit younger than she was. Started much younger, and I think we imply that it starts younger for her as well, but she's just kind of dealing with it at that point. And around the time of my grandmother's sickness and things like that was probably when it was the strongest. And yet, my grandmother had no idea, right? My grandmother had a thick German accent, and we had a great relationship, but it was very much one born when I was a kid, and she was younger as well. So we were close because we lived together, but also not really. You know what I mean? I was a teenager, so I was at school, and I got a car, and I was driving, and she was at home, and she was watching Oprah. She was there when I would come in the door, and, I'd see her, and we'd have dinner together, and we'd have breakfast on the weekends. But, you feel like extraordinarily connected to someone, and yet you kind of feel like they're a stranger in your house, and you feel like a stranger to them, where you can't really relate to them in certain ways that you used to when you were a kid. Keto is, she's been pursuing this Zen Buddhist kind of path, which is something I found to help with some of these OCD things that I struggled with. But I thought it was interesting to play it off of someone who might be suffering the beginnings of dementia, right? Because if you're trying to really eliminate yourself, Alzheimer's is pretty good at that. Yeah. And I had a great aunt who I really looked to as a grandmother as well, and she was brilliant and spoke multiple languages, but for the last 90 years of her life, she just really didn't know who she was, right? So it's weird to look at a goal of obliterating yourself, and yet that can happen to you medically, and how do we think about it? It just becomes the overlap between those two things become interesting to me. So it's like she's getting what she wants, but not in the way that she probably was trying to.
You are so so forthcoming about, especially in the epilogues or author's notes at the end of issues 1 and 4, right?
Yeah.
And
there's a new one in this, I think. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't wait to read it. You're so forthcoming about your ongoing journey, becoming yourself, managing yourself, learning how to be. You use a phrase, I didn't write it down, but so I'm sorry if I can't get it exactly, but these things never get fixed. They get dialed up and dialed down. So I normally wouldn't ask, but since you wrote about it in the author's notes, Luna has, I believe she in the story has, or it's suggested she has pure OCD.
Yeah.
And that's something that you've spoken openly about. Talk to us a little bit about that journey and about.
Well, it's not great, I would say.
I can imagine.
It's not a great one. But yeah, it's. I would say that the difference between me writing those author notes, and you've known me a long time, I think I was very different about a lot of things, especially in my head when we were in college together. Kind of coming to reconcile with those things, I think, has been a big journey. It wasn't really until, I don't know, 2.5 years ago that I finally started to open up about some of these things with therapists and family and, my wife. It was very difficult. I remember in college, the teachers would always be like, you got to write about what you know, and, you should write about yourself and I was like, fuck that. You know what I mean? I was like, I want to write about space, I want to write about who cares? And I just never wanted to reflect. And I think in doing so, and I learned some of that in *Halt and Catch Fire*, and obviously that show brings in a lot of different people's experiences, but finding the real visceral parts of things just translates well, at least in writing, and when people respond to it in a way that as a writer you want them to respond to it, which is, hey, you see me, right? And that is a good feeling. With this was the first time I've ever even really spoken aloud about any of this stuff to anybody outside friends and family. It was something I was deeply ashamed of for most of my life. And to turn around and then say, hey, anybody, like guy over there at the science section of the bookstore, come check out this story of how I was almost hospitalized. That feels so 180 from where I was and how I've trained myself to be about these things. So it's been a weird journey just because it feels so intensely private. All this comic book stuff we talked about at the beginning, right? I'm going through all that stuff the entire time. It's coming in waves, and crests and troughs of these experiences that no one else knows about, right? And then finally where they get so severe at a certain point that I'm like, somebody help, right?
Yeah.
And that didn't happen until I was 35. And so the feeling of being helped felt so good that I wanted to put it down on paper in some way and kind of look back and go, hey, this is kind of what it was like. Now, I didn't see anybody flying in the air, and there was no, violent assault, in my basement. But, sometimes it felt like that, right? And the violence in the book is not just... I try not to make it gratuitous. I tried to make it... What was important for me and the artist was to make it worse than anything Luna could imagine. And she could imagine some really terrible things with the conditions she suffers. So what she witnesses has to be above that in order to challenge her and move her forward in the story, and also make her realize that's not who she is, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And there's also, from what you've shared privately and personally, and what is in the story, these obsessive fixations on imagining the worst possible outcomes, the most violent and graphic, often sexual or violent imagery, is deeply disturbing. It also feels like a very natural fit for comic books and graphic novels as a medium. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if that was liberating at all in expressing this side of your inner self.
Yeah, I would say that it adds a little bit of remove, where it's more impressionistic at times. But also, and if you... it's hard to get a bunch of people to like drag cables and put up lights and have them do that. And I think sometimes that might be, I don't know, I've never done that, but like that might be too overwhelming. What I think also is interesting about comics is that you can dwell on a single image for as long as you want, right? And I found myself doing that as a kid, whether it was a panel I really loved or something beautiful or something really disturbing.
Yeah.
You know, something as simple as like, you know, Wolverine stabbing someone with his claws and being like, did that guy die? You know, like, and then you're looking through the book to find out if that person is dead, and it's never referenced, and you're like, well, but he looks like he died here. Like, someone would die if they were stabbed this way. And you can sit there and stare at it for as long as you want and study it, which itself can be obsessive, right?
Yeah.
And then, but then it gets kind of burned into your mind in the same kind of way that these things can get burned into your mind in a bad way.
Absolutely. Talk to me a little bit about what's going on. This is kind of a plot-related thing, but in the story, Luna has a high school guidance counselor named Dana. Is that correct? Their relationship doesn't seem like a standard high school counselor and then student relationship, and it escalates rather quickly when Dana gets involved in some violent conspiracy type stuff in Luna's life. I was a little perplexed by that relationship, and I want to know if you could talk me through that. And I sensed maybe that there was some allusion or allegory to your own relationship with mental health and psychotherapy and other.
You know, I would say, like, I don't have a specific therapist who got, like, really involved in my life and crossed a bunch of ethical boundaries, but which
And then
is probably
stab
good.
someone in the neck in your
and then
basement.
stab someone.
Yeah.
But I think that the premise of the comic book, and I think this is, you know, something I've been thinking about for a long time, is that, you know, everybody's crazy, right? And that no one really has a stone pillar from which they stand upon always, that there's always something. And so I wanted to take someone who is a guidance counselor and make them human as well, and make them really flawed and really weak at times, and then also bizarrely supportive in ways you wouldn't expect. You know, I've had people in my life where you really look to them as someone who is a pillar of strength, and then you find out things about them where they have these tremendous struggles or past experiences or erratic behaviors that come out, and you just don't understand them. And so, you know, I wanted a character to be like that in the book, where you're like, oh, this is going to be your therapist, and then it's like, well, no, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think by the end of the first arc, she's definitely she's probably not going back to her job at the high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a way, there's an interesting inversion where the formal objective relationship is that Dana is the counselor and is the adult and is the trained professional, and Luna's a student and a minor. And in a weird way, they experience a bunch of really messed up stuff together, and Luna ends up, unless I'm reading it wrong, seemingly being slightly more mentally resilient than Dana, and Dana ends up kind of almost swallowed whole by Luna's both Luna's mental state and then the actual events that happen to them together.
Yeah, I think that Luna has, you're right, I think she has a better mental resiliency than Dana does. Because I think, if anything, Dana is not, she suppressed her stuff. She's had years of suppression of her own stuff to make herself an adult. So if anything, you know, the only reference I have is myself. But, you know, it's somebody who is like, I'm fine. You know what I mean? I'm doing good. Let me help you, right? And then if you're not dealing with some stuff underneath that, it can really overturn your life.
In a way, is her PRO obsessive compulsive disorder her superpower?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it helps me, at least in my career, on a practical level, because Chris and I will be able to write for hours on end. I can sit with something for a long time. Not as well now as I'm better medicated, so
Yeah.
I can't. But I have sat and delivered scripts after writing overnight, and where it just didn't seem like that would happen. I know a lot of people do that, but the details of things, I just won't let go. The formatting of screenplays, I won't let go. Chris taught me about orphans on lines where it's one word underneath a line, right? And now I can't have those in a screenplay. I can't have those in dialogue. It's like, well, he has to say it some way different because there's one word. And so if you see I told Chris that if you see an orphan word underneath sentences, that means I really, really like the sentence or the piece of dialogue.
Just to be clear, you're talking about the actual like formatting of like in Courier
screenplay,
New,
like,
the
if-
sentence is so long that it went onto a second line.
Yeah, exactly. So like, if I wrote our interaction, none of your lines would have orphans, even though no one here would know that.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's really helpful.
I want to talk a little bit more again about so the whole story is called She Could Fly because Luna's obsessed with this mysterious woman that can actually fly in reality, and it becomes kind of a media spectacle. And then this happens pretty early in the story, so I don't know if this is a spoiler alert, but she explodes graphically on live news television, and it feels like Luna changes there. I had two thoughts, and I want to run them by you and kind of see if they're both probably wrong. One is the straightforward one, that this was someone that was at peace and could fly and was free, and that she looked up to or fantasized about being like. Another one was that for a brief moment, every normal person on the street got a brief glimpse of the graphic violence that she was dealing with every day in her daily life, and maybe she didn't feel very special anymore, or that thing, that private torture was taken from her in some way. Is there any truth in either of those, or neither?
I would say the first one you said, which is that this person was free, right, and was flying, and seemed to be liberated from everything. I think that's what Luna transposes on this person that she has no idea the identity of, right? She has no idea who that person is. So it's something she's built in her head. That's the story she's telling herself about this person, because in her head, she's made it the opposite of how she feels, right? And then when that person is gone, I think Luna feels like it's gone from, like this thing was taken from her, or that she'll never have what that person had. And, as she digs deeper, she finds somebody who is probably as troubled, if not more so, than her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really significant, the family unit. I think in a lot of stories, in a lot of people's lives, family unit is a very important thing, an informative thing on our experience. So something that I thought was fascinating was how differently Luna operates in her environment, in her world, in her home, relative to her parents and her grandmother. And there's a almost like melancholic obliviousness to Luna's parents, the characters. One example is the dad character's mom appears after being 7 years away, and I think he says like one surprised sentence. Oh, he actually chases her with a baseball bat, and then the second he realizes that she's back home, it's like life resumes to perfect normalcy. What's going on? What's going on with Luna's parents, and are they behaving that way as a defense mechanism? Are they? Is it a generational shift?
Right.
What's going on?
Mom, Dad, do you want to answer these questions? No, I would say, I think if anything, you want to create two people who love the main character but can not access what that character is going through internally because that character has decided to not share it, right? And so there's an unawareness, right? And I think that that is mostly through the choice of the main character. That said, she's a minor, right? So there are things that can be seen exterior-wise, right? Like, I think the dad at one point says, like, she's getting good grades, because he's working. You know what I mean? Like, he's trying to keep the family together. Like, the mom has a job, too. They're busy. They're also dealing with the grandmother. I think the grandmother arriving is a big part of this, where it's like they're dealing with this new person, this variable that's come back to the family, and trying to figure out how that person fits in. There's a line in the comic book where the dad comes out to the breakfast table and he's like, "How you doing today, Ma?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm just waiting to die." That is literally from our life. My grandmother said that to my dad, and my dad just turned around and like went in the bedroom and was like, "Fuck," you know what I mean? Like, And I still to this day don't know why she said that, but it was like, maybe she was just waiting to die. Like, maybe we all are just waiting to die. Maybe she was just being more honest than all of us were ready to admit in the house. You know, like, I don't know what kind of clarity or fogginess she was under for those last years of her life. So it's like, is she feeling sorry for herself? Is that what's clouding things? Is it she sees what's going on more than anybody else? I think that's a big question for those characters, and I think the family unit is, in flux because in the second issue, the grandmother gets lost.
Yeah.
So the whole thing becomes about the grandmother, right? And so the kid is like, kind of in the passenger seat while they're trying to figure out what to do with the grandmother. And yeah, sure, I experienced that a little bit, but it's just the way it was. You know what I mean? It's just when you get something like that dropped on your family, you really have to go through it. But I think there's also as we all do, there's a really strong desire to want everything to be okay, right?
Yeah.
We all do. And it's really hard to admit that it's not without feeling indulgent, without feeling pessimistic or cynical. But sometimes it's not okay, right?
There's a moment between Luna and her dad that rang very true to me about my relationship with my parents, and then now that I'm a dad and you are as well, there's kind of a super symmetry there, and it was where Luna's dealing with this very heavy, very violent, very turbulent inner life, and that comes across very clearly in the story. And then the dad takes her along to like one of his construction jobs or renovation jobs, and she's like not looking where she's going, and she like falls through the drywall and causes $6,000 of damage, and he's like, shit, like frustrated, right? Like they're dealing with really different things, but what rang true there was that the dad, for as oblivious as he sometimes seems, is like doing what he can do to both survive for himself and provide for his family. And there was I don't know, a little bit of, again, it was sad, but it was also really deeply easy to empathize with that moment of him, almost like blue collar frustration of like, my damn daughter fell through the drywall.
Right. Yeah. It's like in a way, I think those situations feel more like me as a dad.
Yeah.
Where I have a pretty anxious little boy who's the older one of our boys, and it's like, hey, let's do this thing that I know how to do, right? Mm-hmm. And they can flail about in that, and yet there's always the attempt, right? It's like, hey, come see how I install air conditioners. Hey, let's go for a driving lesson. And those things can go horribly wrong, right? But it's the attempt to reach out that I think is the noble effort there. At least I want to tell myself that as a dad. When I was a kid, my dad tried to teach me basketball, and we put up a basketball pole, and we dug the hole in the ground and filled it with cement and raised the pole up, and then we practiced a bounce pass, and in the first one I caught it in the nose. And I just started crying, and I went in the house after a whole day of putting the basketball net up in the ground. And it was like, I'm sure my dad was like, I'm going to get in the car and drive away now. I'm going to leave. And I feel that way with my son sometimes too, right? Where it's like, let's play baseball. And he's like, the glove's making my hand hot. And I'm like, no one is ever allowed to say that to another person. And you just did to me, and I am hurt. But it's not about that. It's about like, let me help you. Let me be a part of your life, even though we're so different. Because we're so different.
There are, switching gears a little bit, there are some, and maybe I was grasping at straws, but some really interesting, I don't know if they were Easter eggs or homages to other comic strips in the story, visual and otherwise. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Give me examples.
So one that, like, I was, and again, this I could be projecting, I was very obsessed as a kid with Batman, and Batman comics, and some of the most messed up ones involved the Scarecrow. Mm-hmm. One weird thing that I thought about this story was that in a weird way, where a lot of modern superhero stories are about superheroes that are complex and gritty and have flaws, there aren't too many supervillain stories where you can empathize with the supervillain. And Luna's story almost feels like it could be like the Scarecrow origin story. Like she could become this deeply easy to empathize with villain that is fixated on violence and
Yeah, I think Luna's probably stronger than the Scarecrow because she doesn't need the neurotoxin to scare the shit out of herself.
The thing I was gonna say is though that is it Bill, the physicist, gets put in the back of the truck. They put a cowl on him, and it's got like a sewed mouth and eyes. And I thought that might be like a Scarecrow homage.
It was actually a reference to Mission Impossible 1.
Oh man.
It's the same kind of mask they put on Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
I really went back to the artist and was like, it needs to look like the mask they put on Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. There's no reason for that other than I like Mission Impossible.
It's a good film.
Yeah.
Another one I thought was that sticker on the back of the train window looked like the Watchmen.
I wasn't
Rorschach's,
trying to do that, but yeah, like
smiley face.
That kind of stuff though is what I if anything, there's probably more movie references into the comic books just because I don't know, that's so easy for me.
Do you want to share a few?
Well, the radio station that comes on that wakes Dana up in the morning, the whole thing that the DJ says is the first line of Ferris Bueller because that's what the DJ does. He wakes up and
that's awesome.
Tells you that it's a beautiful day in Chicago with 78 no hair and all these things. So
that's fantastic.
I put that in there for no reason either, other than I like Ferris Bueller. That's what you can do when you're a writer.
Right, it's like godlike powers.
Yeah.
So something that it seems like a fallacy of the mental health care professionals in the story, and something that you've talked about openly in your journey is that, like we said before, there's never one fix, right? Everybody expects there to be the one thing that works, and there isn't ever that. And you've shared a variety of strategies that you've used to, again, process and adjust to who you are. Do you want to share some of those? I mean, you've talked a little bit about some of the spiritual education that you've done, medication. Yeah. There's a whole variety of things.
Yeah,
gardening. Restoring bicycles.
Finding hobbies. I think also just there's a thing in this. There's a therapy used in this type of OCD called extinction therapy, where you're just confronted over and over again with what you're afraid of. And in a way, I think I just went through that. I went through extinction therapy as a kid because I just went through it, and to the point where it stopped meaning anything, right? Where it was like, okay. And then, when it would bubble up again, you just kind of have to go through that extinction phase. Now, when you have somebody that's actually helping you, like a therapist or something like that, they can guide you through those extinction therapies, and they can say, write it down, write the worst case scenario down, and then record yourself reading it, and then listen to that over and over and over again and rate how anxious it makes you. And that's tough, but, by the end of, a few weeks, it becomes like the Lord's Prayer, where it's like, yeah, and then, like, everybody hates me, and I'm put in jail, and for the rest of my life, and blah, 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 like, I'm hungry, I want a snack. You know what I mean? You get to that place with it, which is pretty impressive. Like, it's kind of like that thing of, don't think of a pink elephant, and then you think of a pink elephant, right? Like, that's a difficult way to approach OCD, right? Where it's like, just don't think of it. Well, you can't, right? So it's like, well, think about it all the time. And think about it even more than you do and exhaust your brain so that it then goes away. So that's been helpful. And then also, obviously, medication and the right treatment and therapy and all these different things. Creating those boundaries for yourself just in your life have become very important because for a long time I felt like, well, that's indulgent, or whatever that is. Like that, I don't have time for that or that's it's me being whiny, Yeah. And just giving into that has been good to be like, oh, I need to do this right now. Yeah. And that's been good.
Should we take questions from anyone that may have questions? Is that something people are interested in doing? I mean, I could ask questions forever, but...
From anyone I have a personal relationship with or a tertiary personal relationship with or connection to? Dave Cadelia.
Yes, nice to meet you. What was something that you maybe thought of putting in the book or tried putting in the book that you really initially envisioned and were excited about and were sort of gutted to have to lose or change that now you think maybe that was for the better?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of things. I think I held things that I wanted to get in, and then when it's like a TV show, right? You get picked up to do more, so I was able to work them in later. If anything, I'm still more worried about things that I kept in. You know what I mean? Or like, do I need that in there? in terms of things I've left out, I always overwrite the outlines. You know, where it's like, there's no possible way I can get all of this in. So some of that you're like, oh, it would have been cool to put that. I can't think of anything specifically, but it really is more things of like, oh, is that like a little too close to the bone? Should I have left that in? But it's too late. So yeah. Yes. Sir in the blue turtleneck. Yes. Okay, so I have a really good idea for a Human Torch story, where that torch, the original Human Torch, the one from the 30s, right? Yeah, oh yeah, well, we talked about this a long time ago. But the new version of this, I think, would be great, is because he's an android. But the problem with the android is that when he walks outside or is exposed to oxygen, he just lights on fire, which is a sad thing for someone to have to deal with. But I liked the idea of that guy coming back and trying to like reinvigorate his image, but Johnny Storm, who's like kind of the Casanova Fantastic Four member, is just too cool for school. And then this older Torch, who used to be a fireman and is like retired, you know, and is like older, is just can't handle the younger kid. I wanted to call it Flame Off. Yeah.
Do we have a question over there? Yeah.
What part of the writing process for this did you find yourself surprising yourself? The outline or the scripting?
I would say that, well, the formatting of the script is completely different, right? I write it in Microsoft Word, which is super weird. There are some people who write comic book scripts and it looks like a screenplay and they just give it to the artist. I have trouble doing that because I overwrite, so then I feel like I would leave the artist going, I don't know what to actually put in there. I think that with this, it's like less is more, like in the writing of the script. I also find that the more invested I am in an issue, which is a lot usually, like the longer the script is, because it's like a 32-page script. But if I turn one in that's 47 pages, I'm like, wow, I really wanted to get a lot of detail in there. But if I turn one in for a 32-page script and it's 32 pages, I was clearly like, well, this is pretty straightforward. Like, just try to draw this. And so there's a lot of trusting the artist. And, you know, Martin Morazzo, who created this book with me, I wish he could be here. He lives in Argentina. It's like, the guy feels like a better director than I can ever hope to be, because you give him a description of what it looks like, and then he finds the best, he places the camera, right? And then he fleshes that out, and if he adjusts it, he's like, hey, is it cool that I moved this over here, or showed a little bit less information here, or broke this into 2 panels? And it's like, every time, it's like, yes, right? So there's a lot of deferment to, the artist feels like the director in a way, right? And so, as a writer in TV or film, you spend a lot of time pissed off at the director. And in this, you really rely, you're like, oh, that looks way better. Yeah, that's what I meant. So trusting the artist more in the script has been big for me.
Are you writing with specific imagery in mind, or is it just sort of like very separate?
So it's like page 1, panel 1, right? Like page 1, or, you know, 5 panels. Panel 1, small panel, this, right? Dialogue, this. And like I said, 3 lines usually you can fit, unless you really want to be crazy, right? Or half splash page, this, you know, double spread, here's what it is, right? And you have to get the double spread numbers right? Because it's not 1 and 2, so you can't have like page 17 and 18. That's not a double spread. You have to do page 18 and 19 because page 1 is always on the inside. It's the second page in the comic book. So I got that wrong a couple times, you know. A writer for *Halt and Catch Fire*, who's on our new show, Zach Whedon, also writes for comic books, and he talks about how difficult it is because you're trying to write for the page flip, right? And it's a different feel from the last panel on this page to what you're seeing over here, because your eye just has to move to the top, as opposed to, oh, what's going to happen? I'm going to flip the page, and it's like a bigger reveal, even though it's a small motor change in your body.
Yeah.
I think about the details a lot, I guess.
It's fantastic. I mean, yeah. I imagine you actually laying it out and like writing
I can't.
on
I don't lay
template
it out like
pages.
just because then I'll just make myself feel bad of how bad
Yeah.
I can draw. But
Yeah.
yeah, I really try to visualize it as much as possible.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Yes.
Early on, was there anything the artist did that surprised you and made you decide to do something different than you were going to do initially?
Yeah, I would say so. I think I mean, when you see the characters for the first time, right? It feels like casting, where you're like, I have this idea, and then you see it and you go, oh, well, that's interesting, and then you change to that. You know, I think that some of the color schemes he brought to it were interesting. It's like simple details too of like Martine likes to show a lot of people's upper teeth. Where they actually, and our editor, Karen Berger, was like, can you pull that back a little bit? We don't see so many people's upper teeth. It's creeping me out.
It is a little aggressive.
Yeah, but I
Like
think
in a
it's like
primate way.
used to effect where it's like, oh, this is like a good upper teeth moment. You know, like that kind of thing is pretty cool. And then the colorist is a different person. So the colorist comes in and they might color it wrong, and wrong meaning like they didn't catch that it was day, right? Or they didn't catch that it was stormy. And it's like, then you get this page back that's this beautiful sunset image, and you're like, well, we can't change this. You know, like I think in the book, there's a flashback, and Keto is described as having originally like a yellow dress with blue flowers. And the colorist went in and made it a pink dress with purple flowers, and it looked incredible. So we just changed it, right? And we just changed the dialogue.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff is great. It's just when you see it, I mean, you know. You see it, you change it. Yeah, you're like, well, that's better. Yeah.
Yes.
I did have a say, which was really nice. Karen Berger, who's the editor of this, all of her books are incredible, by the way. Like, she has this label within Dark Horse, and her first job was when she was 21 at DC in, I think, the early 70s. And she worked up from an office assistant to the person who created the Vertigo label and discovered Neil Gaiman and all of these people and Why the Last Man, all these things. And she's spun off and she's doing her own boutique label now. So she the well of artists she knows, and who's affordable and who's available. She brought several artists to the table, and we looked at their work and decided what would fit the book best and who was available. And then we met Martine, and it was great. And we asked him to do some character sketches, and it was perfect. So yeah, it's been really nice for Karen to include me in the process. It's been awesome.
Any others? One of the last questions I wanted to ask is, what's next for you? Are you going to keep pursuing this medium and learning? Okay.
No, well, there's 5 more issues of She Could Fly that start coming out on April 10th.
Okay.
Which is my dad's birthday. So I remember that.
Happy birthday.
I timed that just right. Those are 22 pages each, but there are 5 of them. And then hopefully we'll get to keep going. I have another series that'll come out in the fall called Everything with Karen as well. I'm going to bring back The Mask for Dark Horse, the thing that scared me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
That's going to come back. And then I have a very tiny, my first Marvel work, which is a great full circle to when I was a kid, is I'm doing a 10-page story about Dr. Doom.
Cool.
Which is in an anthology series that I just finished up, so I'm excited to see what that's like.
I think we all are very excited to see what that's like. I don't know if there's any other. I don't even know what time it is. Has it been like 3 hours?
The store closed a half hour ago.
Oh man, we're all dead. Well, thank you very much. I also wanted to say that in the vein that we've all over the last several years, I think, learned to great effect that representation matters in media, that your openness about mental health is tremendously powerful, and I think is very brave. And I think I can imagine the young Chris or Nick or any of you reading She Could Fly and being very touched and inspired by your story, and not feeling so alone if they're dealing with something similar. So thank you for
that'd be awesome.
Thank you for what you've done.
Thank you for coming up here.
Awesome. Everyone, can you give him a round of applause?
All right.
I broke my damn...
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.